Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show, the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North on this Tuesday, April 16th, 2024. That's AD in case you are really confused and you've been in a coma for the last 2024 plus years. It is great to have you here on Budget Day. I know, are you so excited? The federal budget's coming down the pipeline. Not to say a pipeline because the federal government would never use or support a pipeline under its current form, but a federal budget is coming out in just about 3.5 hours, I think, after the close of markets. Chrystia Freeland's already gotten her fancy Budget Day shoes, which is a tradition that is rather insufferable, but it's not a partisan one specifically. Other leaders have done it. So the mainstream media does their obligatory write-up of Chrystia Freeland's shoes, Justin Trudeau socks, and maybe, the member of Toronto Centre's, bolo tie or something like that. Although I doubt the member for Toronto Centre wears a bolo tie. But nevertheless, actually, I don't even know who the member for Toronto Centre is. No matter what, they don't wear a bolo tie. All right. Well, all that is notwithstanding the fact that we are going to have a banger of a show today. We'll talk to Joe Oliver. To be fair, it's Marcy Ian is Toronto Centre. Sean's told me it's Marcy Ian. So Marcy Ian has worn many things, I'm sure, but a bolo tie, I suspect, is not one of them. Although that might be a good opportunity to go onto one of those AI photo generator things and get Marcy Ian wearing a bolo tie. And actually, she could, while she's wearing the bolo tie, sing Chris Sims's Voice of Alberta song, which was AI generated. So then I can just take a late lunch and we can just leave the show to the bots that will soon be our overlords. But anyway, off the bolo tie train, we are going to share my interview from last week's Canada Strong and Free Network conference with Joe Oliver, the former federal finance minister, on his predictions and projections for today. And I also think we'll check in with our good friend Dan McTeague, who is a former Liberal member of Parliament. He used to be the guy when I was in radio that I'd go to find out what tomorrow's gas prices were going to be, but he has many other talents, and one of them, I think, has been very astutely observing where the Liberal Party has gone since he was a member of Parliament and through its current leadership, and why he is not alone if you look at the polling numbers. So we'll talk about that with Dan McTeague as well. But I do want to begin by talking about this rather absurd symposium that the Governor-General of Canada, Mary Simon, convened to kickstart this campaign to deal with what she believes is the real menace to Canada right now, online harms. Take a look.
I deserve better.
Je mérite mieux.
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 We deserve better. Nous méritons mieux.
Hashtag we deserve better. Look at that roster of stars. We had a gaming influencer. We had Lisa LaFlamme, the former star of the primetime television world. We had Rachel Gilmore, the star of TikTok media work. We had Mary Simon, Her Excellency the Governor General, all saying something uncontroversial, which is that, being harassed online is not pleasant. I, generally speaking, can't wake up without having been online harassed over the night. So it's good. You get to check in on the harassment in the morning, and sometimes you tune it out. Other times something may be a little bit more personal, I suspect. And there are certainly people who get a torrential amount of abuse that is far worse than what I get. And it's terrible. I think we need to have a return to civility in the world. But here's the problem with a message like this, is that the idea of taking aim at online harm, which is what this is doing, is an inherently political one when you have a federal government that is pushing a bill forward called the Online Harms Act. the federal government is using all the things that the people in that video would share as a pretext for regulating and legislating what you can say and do on the internet. Now, the Governor General is meant to be apolitical. She's meant to be above partisanship. She is the representative of King Charles III in Canada. She is meant to, of course, sign off on legislation, but she is not a legislator. She is a politician. That's she is now. She's not a politician, though. And that's the problem that we have here, is that we have the Governor General stepping way, way, way outside her lane and being an advocate on something that His Majesty's government is now articulating as a political strategy. Now, the federal government, of course, was all too happy to jump up on this. Arif Virani, who's the Justice Minister, he's the guy who is leading the charge on Bill C-63, which is the Online Harms Act. He was at the Governor General's symposium the other day. This was the tweet he shared. We know that online harms have real-world consequences, and now is the critical moment to make the digital world a safe space. With industry experts at the Governor General's Symposium, we discussed this and our Online Harms Act to create a safe experience for everyone. So all of a sudden, the Governor General's Symposium, the nonpartisan apolitical Governor General's Symposium, has been a campaign opportunity for the Liberal government to push its online harms bill. Put that tweet up there, by the way, Sean, the one we just had from Arif Virani. I like that the one he wants to lead the charge with him is Theresa Tam. So online harm is now a public safety threat or a public health threat. So Arif Virani and Theresa Tam and the Governor General are all in lockstep on the fact that we can't be trusted to just have our own online discourse. Now, I'm not defending harassment here. I will say, though, that sharing things online is a byproduct of free speech. It's, I would argue, a necessary byproduct of free speech, which is why all of these social media platforms bake into them tools that you can use to curate your experience. There are lots of people that have no issue using that block button liberally. You look at someone block, like I've been blocked by people that I've never interacted with because they just didn't want maybe one day for me to tweet at them, Jan Arden has blocked me on Twitter, which is terrible because if I, ever want to listen to really crappy music on Twitter, now I'm denied that right. But the thing about this that is so fascinating is that anyone who agrees with what the Governor General has said, anyone who agrees with the Liberal legislation has no issue with it. My issue is one of precedent. I wouldn't want the Governor General being out there and having a symposium on how dangerous the carbon tax is, because that is the domain of elected officials. That is the domain of elected representatives. Now, I'm not the first person to raise this. Constitutional scholars have, one of whom was Philippe Lagacé, who's not a conservative or not a partisan by any stretch. He is a very, very well-regarded constitutional scholar in Canada. He says, the Justice Minister is explicitly linking the event to a controversial piece of legislation that's before Parliament. The Governor General's allowed herself to get wrapped up in contentious political debate, which he contends, I would agree with it, but he contends is not right. And then you also have on this Peter Menzies, who we've had on the show and actually met for the first time in person last week at the Canada Strong and Free Network conference. He jumps into the We Deserve Better tweet. He says the Governor General has dropped any pretense of nonpartisanship and is using her office to campaign in favor of legislation currently before Parliament. This is appalling. We certainly deserve better. Yes, in this case, we deserve better than a Governor General that is going to be shilling for the Liberal government, and not just shilling for the Liberal government, but shilling for one of the most dangerous and damaging bills this government, which has been at the helm for 8 years, has possibly and could possibly come up with. There was another post. I forget what this post is, but Sean has it on my list here. So now I get to react to it in real time. What was Nilly Kaplan-Mirth there? Was Nilly at the... Oh, she was. Oh, no, hang on. That can't be Nilly Kaplan-Mirth. I see her face. Therefore, I've never actually seen the full Nilly Kaplan-Mirth face. So that actually might not be here. But she was at the physician or the panel as well as a physician and a school board trustee. She says she was grateful and she was looking forward to hearing about strategies for creating a safe space for us as leaders. It's always great when they use safe space unironically. Well, this should actually tell you something. So you look at the guest list for this symposium. You had people like Dr. Nili Kaplan-Murth. You had Rachel Gilmore. You had Faye Johnston, who's a very, very radical activist on a lot of trans issues and received a lot of government money for her work, by the way. You had people that I have only ever heard championing regulation, championing legislation. I never heard, and again, I wasn't on the guest list. That's way too shishi and bougie for the likes of me. But I have not heard of anyone being there who was critical of this idea, who said, yes, this is an issue, but we also need to protect free speech. So it was not just her wading into a political debate and her wading into a political issue, but it was her doing it in an incredibly one-sided way. And to appropriate Peter Menzies' response to the Governor General, yes, indeed, we do deserve better. And again, just imagine if the Governor General decided to have a symposium on the budget. Like I said, I wouldn't want her coming out and saying that we need to axe the tax, and here are all the people that are going to talk about cost of living and affordability. I mean, the Governor General should take on issues, sure. But it should kind of be like the First Lady in the United States, where you, or the First Gentleman, theoretically, where you take on issues that are uncontroversial. I mean, you can take on childhood obesity, you can take on literacy, you can take on drugs. But even then, you don't take those on when you are a non-partisan figure. I mean, if she were to take on the issue of childhood fitness, for example, which is a great issue, you don't do it when the government is putting forward legislation on that. That's where you need to make sure that you are not leading or playing a supporting cast role to what should be squarely in the political realm. And by the way, on the case of C-63, should be squarely and resoundingly chucked out of the political realm because it's such a terrible piece of legislation. But it is budget day today, so let's have a little chat about what we can expect. Obviously, we'll have more in the way of a debrief tomorrow once we learn what is in the budget, but certainly we can pay some attention to what we expect to be in it and what we hope is in it and what we fear might be in it here. I want to welcome to the show Ryan Mallough, who is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Ryan, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So from a business perspective, going into this budget, I mean, really going into any budget, but this year in particular, what is it you're looking for?
So I think much like people are looking for things around affordability, the cost of living, small business owners across Canada are looking for measures that reduce the cost of doing business. We've been getting absolutely slammed from all sides over the last number of years. Anything that's going to reduce the cost, be that around things like the small business tax rate, things like lowering payroll taxes, paying very close attention to what happens on the carbon tax and whether or not small businesses are going to get their money back that they're owed. Those will be the key measures that we're looking out for, in addition to what the government's spending plans are.
You know, one of the things the government has said is that there's not going to be a tax increase on the middle class, but as we know, that's a term that's very difficult to define. And to bring it around to small business owners, we've heard in the past, the government use small business owners as an example of the wealthy and really not looking at small businesses as being, you know, really the backbone of middle class employment for people. So are you concerned about that there could be something that, you know, on paper looks like, yes, we're going after the wealthy, but to a small business owner is actually just a pretty big slap in the face from the government?
Yeah, I think our ears always perk up when we hear language like that, because it's one thing to have an intention to go after a certain group. It's quite another thing to see how it actually plays out. And we have seen this play out before, specifically around the small business tax rate and questions around who had access to it. And what the government had planned to do at the time was fiercely opposed by the small business community, because it was really, you know, kind of railroading your general convenience store owner, your dry cleaner, not who the government said they were going after. So while, you know, the intention may be good, it always comes down to the practicality of how it's implemented. And that's something that we'll be watching for very closely.
In general, I mean, from an organizational perspective, has the government engaged with your group in a meaningful way as this budget was put together?
Yeah, we've had some very good back and forth with finance, in particular around, again, the carbon tax revenue, the $2.5 billion that small businesses in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario are all owed. Of course, we've also been engaging with all of the opposition parties, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc and Greens as well, to really make sure that the small business views and desires are heard. Of course, it's really a question of how that's going to translate on game day. We'll find out at 4:00. I think we've got some optimism on some measures, but there is still a lot out there that worries us, not insignificantly, what the size of the deficit is going to be, and is there actually going to be a plan to balance, something that's been missing the last couple of budgets.
Yeah, and let's talk about that briefly, because we had this period of general economic goodness, for lack of a better term, when the Liberal government first came in, and there's always the battling about whether the Conservatives were the ones that gave it to them or whether they did it. That's always the fight in politics. But at the time, the government was saying, well, things are good right now, we can afford to spend, and then when things weren't as good, they say, well, now we need to spend because things aren't great. And I'm thinking, well, hang on, when's the time you don't spend? If you spend in good times and spend in bad times. But here we are with massive deficits and really not what we've seen so far in previous budgets, a realistic plan to get to balance.
Yeah, and that is a serious concern for small business owners across the country. I mean, any small business owner will tell you that balancing their own books is something that occupies a lot of brain space throughout the course of the year. But when governments run deficits, it tends to turn into taxes. It tends to turn into the conversations that we've seen leading up to this budget about new revenue sources and what that's going to look like. And unfortunately for small business owners, they often find themselves on the wrong end of those conversations and those policies. So having a clear plan to get back to balance, a clear pathway, and something that's realistic is something we very much want to see. Whether or not we do, we're a few hours out from finding out, but something that we are, again, watching very closely.
I know I've spoken to your colleague, Dan Kelly, in the past, and one of the things that came up in the last few years is just how many businesses did not come out from this end of the pandemic. It was a very disruptive time, and some of this was a consequence of government relations. Other was, inflation and interest rates and all of these things. And some businesses, probably under normal circumstances might not have survived as well. But when we talk about where we are now, are there businesses that are still very much in a recovery mode where, they're kicking, but they still haven't fully gotten back to pre-pandemic operations?
Absolutely. In fact, I would venture to say that most businesses find themselves in that circumstance. I mean, for a lot of businesses, you look at the downtown cores across the country, the reality is very different between 2019 and 2024. Work patterns are different. We've seen hybrid work take hold. If you are, a dry cleaner or a lunch spot that depended on a 9 to 5 rush, you're not necessarily seeing that anymore. And there still is a transition going on in terms of, what the new business model looks like coming out of that. We are also concerningly seeing a lot more businesses exit the space than we are seeing come in. And part of that is interest rates, but it's also just the appetite for risk that business owners need to have to jump in is a lot lower right now as well. So again, looking at how we reinforce some of the small business confidence that we just have not seen in the last 4 years. I think the budget plays an important role in that, but also ensuring that, again, the financing options, the stability coming out of the budget is there for small business owners moving forward.
I obviously on this show focus a lot on the politics, but for businesses, they have to tick along regardless of who's in power here. So at the end of the day, though, I was wondering what I could ask you, or if I could ask you here, what could the government do that would at least signal a possible return of confidence or possibly trigger that? What could you hear today, if anything, that would make people that are really not feeling like this is the climate to invest in to actually be comfortable doing so?
So I think there's a couple pieces there. One, the $2.5 billion owed on the carbon tax. This is money that's already been collected. We want to see a plan for that to come back, and not just a commitment, but a plan to return that money to small business owners. We'd also like to see a plan for what is the plan for the carbon tax moving forward. They are continuing to collect money. There's been conversations about what's already been collected, less about what's happening with dollars moving forward. And again, some certainty around that would be important. Also, in acknowledging that the cost of doing business has gone up, what is the government doing to lower taxes overall? Are we going to see any movement on the small business tax rate? Are we going to see any movement on payroll taxes? CPP and EI are both up this year. Is there going to be any kind of relief on that? And then I think finally, is the government signaling that they're getting their own house in order? Is there a plan for the deficit? Is there a plan that business owners can be confident that is stable moving forward? Is also going to be, I think, a pretty significant tell.
All right. Well, we'll certainly keep an eye peeled for that. My thanks to Ryan Mallough for coming on from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thank you, Ryan.
Anytime.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And it wouldn't be a budget day without hearing. I mean, you get two options. We can hear from Chrystia Freeland. That's an option. Or we could hear from a former finance minister who I find has a much more solid head on his shoulders as it comes to economics. And by the way, that great economic period of prosperity the Liberal government inherited in 2015 came on the heels of my next guest in the term in Ottawa, who I had the chance to catch up with last week at the Canada Strong and Free Network conference. Well, anyone who's been following the descent of Canada's economic situation over the last 8 years or so has no doubt missed the glory days of Canada's economy when we had the gentleman who's sitting next to me at the helm, former Finance Minister Joe Oliver, who's also become a tremendous Financial Post columnist on occasion, a National Post columnist in his post-political life. Joe, it's good to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Great to be on the show with you.
I could just get you to talk in your mic there.
There we go. There we go. Well, this isn't my first rodeo, so I should know.
I was going to say, what he has in financial acumen, he lacks in audio visual capabilities, but we'll make it work here.
Okay.
Let's just talk in general about the forecasting here, because this is a forward-looking event, a lot of optimism about the possibility of replacing Justin Trudeau's government. If you were a finance minister coming into this, how would you even begin? Because the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre have talked about balancing budgets, lowering government spending, but it takes a lot of time to correct the problem before you can do what you want, I would imagine.
Yes, well, it does, and that's why you can't say we're going to balance the budget next year. That would be draconian and unjustified. However, you have to set a target, a realistic target. Hopefully, it would be in the first term of government. Let's say within 4 years. But I haven't, delved into all the numbers, some of which are not necessarily fully disclosed, shall we say. But you have to have a target, a realistic target, and start moving towards it. What you have to do is stop the profligate spending. That's absolutely crucial, and then focus on issues which will enhance productivity, because that's been a disaster for Canada. Basically, GDP per capita, which measures personal prosperity, has been essentially flat for during the whole Trudeau government, and that's what people, of course, feel. They feel the higher prices and the fact that they're not keeping up in terms of their personal salaries. And the OECD has projected that Canada will be the worst among the 38 wealthy countries in the world over the next 20 years and then 40 years. So we have to do something about that, and there are a variety of ways to do it. I'd say one critical element is start developing our natural resources and start exporting them to overseas markets, which not only will create an enormous amount of revenue, employ people, increase national security, and also help our allies. Then we have to look at the tax system to make sure it's efficient, that it isn't excessive, that it encourages entrepreneurship and allows an affordable life for Canadians. Focus on issues of science and technology to increase productivity that way. But we've got to get more capital coming into the country. We have a capital flight problem, the precise opposite of what we want. It's not that Canadian workers are lazy or incompetent, quite to the contrary. But if so little money is being spent to enhance technology and they're having to work harder than the Americans are, and therefore they're less productive. Not because, as I say, they work less hard, but because they just don't have the materials to work with, which would make them more efficient.
So one of the challenges, and we saw this especially during the Conservative leadership race, Pierre Poilievre put a fair bit of the blame for inflation on the Bank of Canada and its money printing. And I know that there was a lot of bristling from the Laurentian elites about this. And at the same time, if I look back to the Harper government, when you were finance minister and even when your predecessor, Jim Flaherty, was, I don't recall really any public acrimony between the government and the bank. And I was wanting to get your thoughts on is that appropriate, the criticism that was directed there? And what are the implications of that? How much blame does that institution actually have for what's happened?
Well, we respected the independence of the monetary authority of the Bank of Canada, but on the other hand, we weren't fighting with fiscal policy wasn't fighting monetary policy, and vice versa. We were trying to, we're moving in the same direction. Now we have fiscal policy which has thrown a huge burden on the Bank of Canada, and which can't shoulder it all on its own. And of course, you hear from the governor and the deputy governors about, now's the time to break the glass because we've got a productivity problem. We have a debt problem. And the bank will independently decide based on data when it's time to start reducing rates. They'll be looking at the inflation numbers. I suspect they're going to start reducing rates, fairly soon, maybe even within a couple of months. But there are implications to that. There's affordability, but there's also the impact on the dollar if the Fed doesn't reduce rates as well. So it's quite complex. The Prime Minister doesn't spend much time apparently thinking about monetary policy, and we know what he's done with fiscal policy. So it's a ground zero so far. But I'm not going to give advice to the monetary authority, but I think the government keeps its distance, but ultimately it's responsible.
So explain to me where a lot of this is going, because I remember when the Bank of Canada said inflation was going to be transitory, and then we learned it was something that would get quite severe, and even if it's cooled a little bit, it's still affecting people. And then you have fiscal policy that is exacerbating affordability problems such as carbon taxes and so on. But if we look forward, and I wouldn't say that this has been an entire elephant in the room, some people have talked about it. Canadians who have to renew their mortgages within the next 1, 2, 3 years are in for a rude awakening. And I wonder where this goes.
Well, let me just refer back to Pierre Poilievre's frustration, I guess, with monetary policy. And it goes back to a hearing in the House when he was questioning the governor, and he said Pierre felt that we've got an inflation problem that's there and growing, and the governor said, well, it's transitory. It turned out Pierre was right and the governor was wrong, and the governor admitted he was wrong. So it was frustrating for Pierre, who wanted the bank to move in the interest of the economy and everyday citizens. Well, I think data has sort of moved the bank, and now you're mentioning some of the critical affordability issues. I mean, we know housing is really in crisis at this moment, and a dream has been quashed for people wanting to buy their first home. And there's a lot of fear in the air because some of these mortgages are coming due. I think there's going to be a lot of political push on the bank to move, but it will move when it thinks it's appropriate. But I think it will move this year, and I think things will start to get a bit better on the interest rate side.
I wanted to move to a very different issue, but one that I know is near and dear to your heart, which is Israel, and I think in general the threats facing the Jewish community in this country, of which you're a member. And I wanted to ask about whether you saw what's happening coming before, because I think anti-Semitism, as many people have said, has not emerged. It's been exposed. I think it's always been there, and people are being a lot more brazen with it. But we've now seen the targeting of Jewish businesses, of Jewish neighborhoods. It's not just, protesting at the Israeli consulate or embassy, which I'd say is a legitimate place to protest. It's protesting Jewish people. And is this something that you foresaw in this country?
Well, I knew it was always a potential, and I just want to say that here at this conference at the Canada Strong and Free, I've been very heartened, but not in the least surprised by the terrific support for Israel and for the Jewish people, and the remarks that our leader Pierre Poilievre made about the Jewish community in Canada, and how we he stands with, and we all stand with all our friends and neighbors. So. This isn't all a dark story, but Anti-Semitism has been a constant for thousands of years. You can analyze why and what the rationale or rationalizations for it, but it always seems to be there lurking. And what is perhaps new is that it's no longer just a phenomenon of the far right. In fact, it's less of a problem in the far right because they've been so marginalized. They're not less hateful. I'm not suggesting that, but they're not as big a threat. Unfortunately, in the left, the new postmodernism, intersectionality, critical race theory, the assignment of people to two categories of oppressed and oppressors has worked against the Jewish community, which maybe wasn't viewed as an exemplar of whiteness, is now, we're all together in this, Andrew, and so Israel is being judged in that context, and it's been an opportunity, frankly, for some of this ugliness to come out of the sewer and onto the streets of this country, and that's worrying and a blight. Frankly.
And I would take what you've said there and add to it by pointing out that this exists in the far right. It exists in the mainstream left. And this is the challenge, is that you don't actually need to go to the fringes of the left to find a lot of this venom against Jews. And that has been...
you'll find it in the universities.
Yes.
Mainstream.
Well, you'll find it in caucus. I mean, you'll find it in the NDP caucus and to some extent in the Liberal caucus as well.
Yeah. It's a deep concern, and I think, we hope that our friends and neighbors will see it as not only a threat to a community, a minority community, but really a threat to Canadian values, an assault on Canadian values, and a threat to the type of country we want to see Canada continue to be.
Joe Oliver, always a pleasure, sir.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
That was former Finance Minister Joe Oliver on budgets, finance, and, of course, on anti-Semitism, which was not the issue he tackled as Finance Minister, but certainly has been one on which he's been very opinionated, and I think rightfully so, given what he's seen happen in his country and his own city, and he's a Torontonian. And one thing that I find interesting here, just to go back to the budget side of this, is that, I mean, he was a finance minister for a relatively short period of time. But, everyone wants to say that, the circumstances have to be just so, they have to be just right if you want to balance your budget. And the Conservatives in 2019 under Andrew Scheer, I don't believe they did it in 2021 under O'Toole, they had put in their platform a balanced budget law, basically a law saying that the Conservative government or any other government would have to balance the budget. Now, part of this is, I'd say, a little bit superficial in the sense that a government can change a law. So a future government could just amend the law to say every budget has to be balanced except for this one if it really wanted to. But even so, it would have to sell that to Canadians. It would have to say that this spending is so important, we are going to break this law. And I don't think any government spending is really going to be that important. Now, I've talked about this with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. I've asked him, look, how quickly are you going to get to balance? And he's not able to give an answer. And I'm sympathetic to that in part because he's not there yet, so he doesn't know what he's going to inherit. But at the same time, it also makes it hugely challenging for any new party to take over, any new government to take over and look at, I mean, again, it's like someone just racking up, some bazillion dollars of debt on a credit card, then handing you the credit card and saying, okay, pay it off. Sure, you can be as fiscally prudent as you want and as you can be, but you still are starting from a pretty dismal place. And that's what Canada is going to look like for the foreseeable future, I fear. And again, we'll see just how bad things are now. But the government, remember, is in campaign mode. So they're going to do all of these things that make it easier for people that are in the designated voting blocks, and everyone else in the country will have to foot the bill for it. Pierre Poilievre did weigh in on this morning. He had a press conference in front of West Block with his, I think it was pretty much the entire caucus behind him, and he had some choice words for Justin Trudeau. Oh, do we not have that? I thought we had that. Sean says shoot. I don't know if that means shoot, we don't have it, or shoot, it's late. Oh, we don't have it. Okay. Well, never mind. Just you had to be there, I guess. But nevertheless, I do have another interview from last week's conference I wanted to share with you. The Canada Strong and Free Network conference was a great time. Saw lots of people from the conservative movement, but some unlikely people there when you look around and see a former Liberal member of Parliament. Now, Dan McTeague is a guy who has been a fairly vocal critic of the Liberals in recent years, but he was in their ranks for quite some time. This was my chat with him.
Well, we've talked a lot about the changing tides in politics. People can become unlikely allies and unlikely enemies, but one of the most stalwart opponents of some of the very damaging and economically harmful environmental policies we've seen in recent years has been from a former Liberal member of Parliament, Dan McTeague. Now, I don't want to be reductivist. He's got a long and storied career outside of his time in Parliament as a Liberal MP. He was, like always, the go-to guy when I was in talk radio on gas prices, and now he's the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy and joins us now. Dan, good to talk to you in the flesh. Thanks for sitting down today.
Finally good to be here, and after such a long time,
Andrew. There are some people that haven't followed your post-political work would be surprised when they look at you on Twitter and be like, former Liberal MP says what?
Yes.
But you've been such an incredible critic of a lot of this government's environmental and economic policies. And I wanted to ask you more broadly how you and the Liberal Party diverge so much.
Well, I think the Liberal Party diverges from where the Liberal Party was. Members like myself who had the consumer file, consular file, people who were always concerned about bread and butter issues, being able to make ends meet, recognizing that the country is a very diverse nation, not just physically, not just culturally, but in terms of its economy. Manufacturing, mining, forestry, agriculture, and energy. And all those things combined have been really at the core of why we're a wealthy nation. We have in this government, particularly under Justin Trudeau, a deviation from a significant one to the point where these things are being excluded, ignored, in some cases reviled, and it's having an impact on the bottom line for every Canadian.
Is your experience, it's unique to you obviously given that you were an MP, but is your experience something you've seen reflected in other people you've spoken to where they've gone through a very similar trajectory to you on these issues or even other ones?
A lot of them have simply moved on. When I was elected, I was 31 years of age, 31, can't remember the time. Young guy, just married, a wonderful wife, and I was the youngest of the group. Mm-hmm. The average age was 55. Many of those members of Parliament are since deceased, moved on, or very much in their age. So it's hard for me to calibrate with others.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's no doubt that being in power has made a lot of people believe, hey, I just want to be a Liberal, I'm always a Liberal, I'll remain that way. I have never been a member of any other party, but this is no longer the party that I've served since 1978.
Explain to me what they're getting so wrong, because it's one thing to say I don't like the carbon tax because it's going to make things more expensive. You're actually an expert in this space. I mean, you know fuel prices better than anyone else, and you also, by extension, know a lot of the policies and drivers around those things better than most.
Party used to have something called pragmatism. It's really the way in which it survived. It became the big tent party that attracted so many. On the right, on the left, depending on the region of the country, different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds, agnostics, whatever the case may be. There was always a place for you in the party, and you could express those. You could articulate those. You could actually make changes, private members' bills. That's been lost, and it's become very conformist. It's become very uniform. It's very rigid, and it's all really under the cult of personality of one individual. So whatever Justin Trudeau, and the name is important because, of course, that's why a lot of Canadians put them back in power in 2015, but they don't represent, I think, the common person as we're currently seeing today. And a lot of people feel estranged, not just from the political process, but this government in particular. I think it's a dangerous sign, by the way, because as I see this, without any, I am not a member of the party, I see the Conservatives moving further to the centre, picking up those votes, and they're basically legion. That's why they will win the next election.
If you were environment minister right now, or you were resource minister, pick one of those ones that has control over this file, what would be that vision that you would present, where you get to tackle all of these things that the government says are a problem and a priority, but in a way that doesn't damage and harm consumers and industries?
I would listen to those consumers first. I go to Quebec and realize that most people in Quebec support pipelines, not as the elites are saying. I would ignore the elites. The top 20% have a lot of money and don't care what this is going to cost them have ignored the bottom 80%. That's where the middle class was. I want to do something tomorrow night, I'd say build a pipeline east, build a pipeline west. I don't say that because I like the industry. They don't like me, and I don't like them. And I've been predicting gas prices. It's caused them tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue. By predicting gas prices, by the way, it's going to be up 10 cents a litre between now and next week. It's already starting in Atlantic Canada. A number of reasons for that.
You heard it here first, folks.
That's right. So if you're paying $1.64 in Toronto today, you'll be paying $1.74 next week, Andrew. The reality is that energy is extremely important. It permeates our entire life. To ignore it, to trivialize it, or to create a narrative that says we can get rid of it is insane. At the end of the day, Canada, I think, increasingly is going to start to get back to those pragmatic ways and say energy is our future. We want to maintain our standard of living. We better reinvest in it and do the things right, and the rest of the world is knocking on our door and asking for it.
And I think what's interesting about that is that oftentimes you hear a debate, even among conservative politicians, about the value of a consumer carbon price versus something that's more targeted at industry. Now, I've always taken the view that that's a bit deceptive because no matter what, that's getting trickled down. A company is not saying, all right, well, we're paying it, therefore it won't be passed down. The only thing that changes is you don't have the line item on the receipt. And in that sense, I guess a consumer carbon tax is somewhat more transparent. Is your view that the mechanism itself is flawed or that there's a better way to do it?
Well, I think what we want, the aspirational goals are important. But we've done too much aspiration. We haven't done reality. And if we want to achieve those things through technology, then let's by all means do that. But by the way, while we're doing that, take inventory of the great things that we've done in this country. As I said, I'm not here to rah-rah for the oil industry, but Canadians have this tendency of saying, shucks, we're not great, we have to do more. Let's do that practically when these things become available. And it's nice to say no taxes, let's emphasize tech. We can do that. But let's ensure that we have and respect the laws of physics and thermodynamics. In all of these things that we want to accomplish, I think we have to be realistic. The world wants more energy. They specifically want more Canadian energy. And as a result of creating another 150, 200 billion bucks in economic activity, I can create more hospitals in this country. The Liberals of my time always said we are going to take the measures of ensuring that we build pipelines, that we get our financial house in order so we maintain the standard of living that Canadians come to expect. Unfortunately, this group of Liberals has simply lost their way here and decided that those are no longer values worth holding. I believe the rest of the world is finally saying, as the Europeans are saying today, put a pause on this stuff.
Well, and that's such a crucial point. And I was speaking about this with Tony Abbott from Australia earlier, and one of the things that he brought up is that there are lots of people that say they care about this, but when push comes to shove and you ask how much they're willing to pay for it, it's amazing how little they really do, and how a lot of these policies are really luxury items for the first, for the elites. And,
yes.
And I think that's a point that's missing in Canada. I mean, when a lot of these measures are put forward, it's really saying that things like driving, which if you live in rural Alberta, rural Ontario, saying that's discretionary, when for a lot of people it isn't.
No. Look, carbon taxes are the low-hanging fruit. But when you start talking about clean fuel standards, which is not going to be rebated, which a lot of people don't know about, which industry is saying, yeah, we'll go along with it, comfortable in the knowledge they can pass it on to consumers.
Yeah.
Same thing for all of these other mandates. We want to pursue them, but I think we need to take a bit of a step back. Jean Chrétien used to always say, I want to look before I jump in the pool, make sure there's water in there. And he was right. I think what we've wanted to do is well-intentioned. And that's where Canadians are. They want to be the right thing, but they also don't want to do it in a way that's damaging their prosperity, their future. And as a result, turning a lot of people away from the very goals that the environmental movement wants us to be towards. There's a compromise. It's the Canadian way, but we become so uniquely focused on damaging one industry, manufacturing, oil and gas, mining, forestry, that we've done ourselves a significant economic and social disservice.
Dan McTeague, thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
That was Dan McTeague, the old, I think it was the old Reagan line that he appropriated there. I didn't leave the Liberal Party, the Liberal Party left me. But again, if you look at the poll numbers, a lot more people in that boat. Not necessarily all members of Parliament, but certainly people who have been lifelong Liberal supporters of the NDP, perhaps non-voters that are all coming back. Sean says people want to see the Poilievre clip, so he's done what the people want and has produced this poll. I don't know if everyone wants it. I mean, some people are for it, some people are against it, but I'm for the people. So let's roll that clip now. This is what Poilievre said this morning in front of West Block.
So my message to Justin Trudeau is this, in one word: stop. Stop doubling housing costs. Stop taxing our farmers and food when our single moms and seniors are going hungry. Stop the inflationary deficits that are driving up interest rates and forcing Canadians to lose their homes. Stop endangering our social programs and jobs by adding more and more debt. For the love of God, Justin Trudeau, you are not worth the cost. So today, will you please stop? Stop until common sense Conservatives can start governing with common sense for this country.
That was Pierre Poilievre. His message to Justin Trudeau is to just stop. Now, I would like to think that I know a little bit about Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, having written a book about him, which is coming out in just a few weeks' time. But I suspect from his background, he is well aware of William F. Buckley, who was the conservative intellectual in the U.S., the founder of the National Review. And he had a fantastic quote that I'll share to you today. A conservative is someone who stands athwart history, yelling stop at a time when no one is inclined to do so, or to have much patience with those who so urge it. So standing athwart history and yelling stop is what Conservatives need to do. Pierre Poilievre is saying to the federal government right now, stop, 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 stop spending, stop doing this. That is, again, I didn't come across in my studies for the book whether he was specifically a student of Buckley, but given other people he did study, it wouldn't have surprised me. So I certainly heard shades of William F. Buckley Jr. in that little clip we shared there. So glad we got that in. By the way, the book, Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life, comes out. Yeah, I mean, I'm the author, Andrew Lawton. I'm not Pierre Poilievre. But it comes out on May 28th. It's actually, let me just check before I get your hopes up. I believe it's, Amazon has it marked down, which normally is a bad sign because it means they're like just trying to clear out all this inventory that no one wants. But the book hasn't come out yet. So I guess they're just marking it down because the algorithm said it was a good idea. But you can get that on sale if you pre-order it now for basically $10 off. So it's on Amazon. Indigo's going to carry it. We've got it from the publisher directly, Sutherland House, and I will be flogging it. I think flogging is the right word. I'll be pushing it nonstop as the release date nears anyway. So thanks to those of you who have sent your kind words about that and told me you have already pre-ordered it. That does it for us today. We'll have a breakdown of the budget and some more goodies from the Canada Strong and Free Network Conference tomorrow. This is The Andrew Lawton Show. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.